Record.
This meeting is being recorded by the host or a participant.
There we go. And is it Rukeya? How do you pronounce your name?
Yes, Professor Rukaya.
Rukaya, nice to meet you. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Professor?
I'm good. And Daniel, yes.
Yeah, before when you're discussing about the homework, so like the latest you would accept is by Friday? Like
by the end of the week, let's put it that way.
Okay.
Right? Okay. All right. So we need to
Professor,
get into
before you start, what do you mean by the end of the week? Because your end of the week is Wednesday.
Yeah, I know.
So what you mean by at the end of
okay, fine. Since you asked and you need an answer, the absolute latest day is Sunday.
Perfect.
And you know what? I'll send out some messages clarifying this.
Could you send an announcement explaining what is, and then it's there forever and anybody read it?
Put it where?
An announcement. Put it
Okay.
in an announcement.
Okay, fair enough.
And it stay there forever, and everybody can read it there, and to go back to it anytime.
Okay, so Destiny, make sure to message me then. All right, business.
Okay,
we gotta. It's 7:45 now. We got to move on from business stuff. But if you have other questions, please email me. And obviously, I want to be able to answer all your questions. But honestly, if you really need it asked, let's do it at the end of class. So let's keep in mind what the theme of this course is. And because one of the interesting questions is, obviously, we all know that the Republic is primarily dedicated to what topic or what theme? You haven't read the whole text, but you've read enough to know what the theme of the text is. What is the basic theme or concern of Plato's Republic? Well, it's not how to make Neapolitan pizza. What is it? What's the theme of this text?
Is that the love and wisdom?
That's what philosophy is, the love of wisdom. But there's something, I mean, the Republic is an exercise in philosophy, right? But what specifically is this text concerned with? What theme or what topic or what question?
Justice.
I'm sorry?
Justice. It is about justice.
Justice. Justice. Thank you. Absolutely. So what we need to do today is to clarify, obviously, what this thing justice is. And it's kind of one thing in many things. Like there is a core thing that justice is, but then of course, there's opinions about how it can be manifest. And you notice that the characters turn out to have different opinions about what justice is. So justice on one hand is one thing, and on another hand, it's many things. But we really want to clarify in the beginning, after we do a little intro, is to clarify the question of what is the relationship between justice, human happiness, and our relationships with one another. This course is a course about relationships between human beings, and particularly the things that motivate us to act certain ways toward other people, ways that result in harmony and ways that result in conflict, right? And justice is some kind of system that deals with right and wrong. And if you think of it in those terms, when you do the right thing, you end up being in harmony with
your neighbor.
Yeah, not just your neighbor, but also who or what else. But your neighbor is very well put, because you're making a reference now back to mending wall, which is appropriate. You're not, when you follow the rules of justice and you do what's right, maybe we disagree about what right is, but we all agree we should do the right thing generically, right?
Yes.
When we do the right thing, we're going to be in harmony with our neighbor and who or what else?
The law.
The law and who or what? Absolutely. So now you're talking about Hobbes. Good. Who or what else are we going to be in harmony with? It's a who. It's more of a who, but it's also a kind of a what. But it has to do with people.
The government.
You're getting warmer. The government and who else? Not just your neighbor, but
The community.
yes. And we're going to start to use the word the political community, which is to say, not just the government, but the society over which the government rules, right? The society over which the government rules. So you can see immediately now that when you act in harmony with justice, you do what's right. You act in harmony with your own society, your own community, not just one neighbor, but your entire political community. It raises the specter of not just morality, but of politics. And we might say right now, because we'll talk about this more next week, politics has something to do with government, right? That's where we kind of see politics happening. But of course, what is one of the main functions of politics? It's to make laws for society, right? The legislative branch of a government makes laws. And from the ancient world up until the present, it has been understood that the primary function of politics or government is to make the laws, not just that one person is going to live by, but that all of us are going to live by. And of course, last week we established, I think we pretty much established the necessity for laws, right? We established that basically what the other neighbor in Mending Walls said is really accurate. It's good fences make good neighbors. Good fences make good neighbors. Now, in looking at Mending Wall, we realized that this concept of the fence didn't just mean some physical boundary between two neighbors' property, right? That we were really talking more symbolically about the boundaries that are placed on our actions, that are placed between human beings, but they're not necessarily simple physical boundaries. The boundaries, what are the things that create boundaries around our own conduct that prevent us from doing certain things? What do we call them? What do we call those things in society that create boundaries around our conduct? Destiny says morality. I absolutely agree. Apart from morality, what is the other thing that really puts boundaries around our conduct? We've already talked about it.
Is it law?
Fear.
I'm sorry?
Law?
Yeah, so Mame says law, rules. Yeah, laws, right?
Maybe fear.
Yes, so the fear is we'll come back to fear. Now, Thomas Hobbes has read his Plato very carefully. And when we get to this story of Gyges and this ring, and also the story of Cephalus, who is the old man who is the head of the household, right? We're going to get to this issue of the role of fear in inspiring people to do the right thing. And what, Hobbes' basic question is people should do the right thing for practical reasons. He's a very practical man. He's not about moral principles so much. He's about practicality. All human beings want to survive. He says they want conservation and delectation. They want to preserve themselves, self-preservation, survival, and they also want to enjoy. Delectation is just a fancy word for enjoying themselves. They want some type of pleasure. Now, we all have different types of pleasure we pursue, but once we're alive and we're surviving, then we say to ourselves, survival's not really enough. I want to survive well. Aristotle next week is going to say that we don't desire just to live, we desire to live well. And living well is just a synonym for human happiness, right? It's just another way of talking about it. And it's a topic that Cephalus raises in his opening conversation with Socrates, right? Okay, so Hobbes wants people to do the right thing simply because it allows them to actually survive and enjoy themselves. Because when you don't have a system of justice and you don't have a government to enforce it, because you need some form of government or political entity to enforce it, what you have is anarchy, chaos, death, murder, mayhem, and society is obviously not able to thrive. Human beings are, to put it really simply, they're not able to enjoy themselves. One need only look at the conflict over in Ukraine to see that something like a war creates a condition that's something like what Hobbes described. It's one where everyone lives in fear and terror of violent death. And what we want to do is to solve the problem of the fear of violent death. So we create government, you get people to follow the rules, and then everybody can enjoy themselves, right? Good fences make good neighbors. A good political system, a good justice system makes good neighbors, right? What did I want to say here? So for Hobbes and for Plato, there's a question of what fear is going to inspire people to do the right thing, because they're both kind of, they're kind of realists, or you might call them even a little bit cynical, or even a little bit pessimistic. Obviously, Hobbes looks very pessimistic in the chapter, of the natural condition, is this very dark and grim life, where he calls it, short, brutish, nasty, miserable. It's a condition of misery rather than felicity. The question is the fear of what? What fear will inspire people to do the right thing? Right? And these are two thinkers who entertain the notion that people don't seem to do, or I should say it this way, most people don't seem to do the right thing simply for the sake of doing the right thing, right? If I asked you all, why do you do the right thing? I'm sure many of you will say, I do the right thing because that's the right thing to do. But I think when we start to look at what Hobbes tells us and what Plato is going to tell us, we see that a lot of people are going to do the right thing because it's just more convenient than doing the naughty thing. But if there was some circumstance, some situation where you could do the naughty thing and get away with it, I think, well, let me ask you guys, imagine a world in which you could do all the naughty things you wanted and satisfy your own desires, and you could get away with it. Would those people in that situation do the quote unquote right thing, or would they do the naughty thing and get away with it? By definition, get away with it.
Get away with it.
How many people say get away with it?
I would say get away with it. Yeah.
Anyone want to say that there's someone out there who's going to do the right thing, even when they can, I don't know, they can rob the bank and they're just not going to do it. They go, no, I don't do those kind of things. Right? Okay. So you're all kind of realists. I always get some students. I mean, I don't want to there are different points of view here to be considered. I do believe there are people who won't do the wrong thing in that situation. I do believe they exist. Unfortunately, I think they're a great minority, right? Okay, so think about it for a second. We're just trying to tie together this concept of justice with relationships with other human beings. We established last week that human beings have a lot of desires that, if acted on, would actually harm other human beings. And in fact, Hobbes gives us these three kind of psychological motivators that he talked about competition, diffidence, and recognition or glory. And what he's really talking about is three very deep, profoundly rooted psychological motivations in human nature, something that's kind of fixed and doesn't change from one historical epoch to another. Three things that motivate human beings to desire things that put them in conflict with one another. And I think he sees that since there is this conflict that's generated by human nature, the only solution is to have a very powerful government with law enforcement come in to restrict certain freedoms, right? In the state of nature, what are you free to do? How much are you free to do in the state of nature? Everybody's forgotten Hobbes already. Is there anything you're prohibited from doing in this natural condition? From
No.
last week?
No.
No, no. He says in this natural condition, every man hath a right to everything. You have the ability to do whatever you want, right? So establishing a system of justice means saying that there are certain actions you're not going to be free to do, which is another way of saying there are going to be certain human desires that are in you simply because you're a human being, not because you're even you, just because you're a human being. Certain desires you're not going to be permitted to act on. And this is one of the great, it's quite a disturbing observation to see that there are desires and motivations in human beings that naturally put them in conflict with other human beings. I think we're just like that neighbor in Mending Wall. Why does there have to be this wall? Something there is that doesn't love a wall in my heart. We don't want to believe that we need walls, because that wall is a boundary that inhibits a certain type of intimacy, number one. And number two, it's the recognition that we're imperfect beings that are flawed, that might harm other human beings. And we don't have to recognize that, that we're capable of such things, right? But I think we said last week that the very existence of government, the very existence of laws is a recognition that human beings have desires that if acted out would harm other people, right? Why did the murderer kill somebody? Well, the simple answer is they wanted to, which means there's the impulse in them to want to do it. And they did it even with the death penalty, known. Imagine the world of the state of nature or the natural condition where there's no technical penalty for killing another. Actually, it wouldn't be called murder, because murder is like a term of justice or a term of morality. It means wrongful killing. In the state of nature, there is no wrongful killing. So justice has everything to do with our happiness, because it rewards certain behaviors and punishes other behaviors. And it also has everything to do with our relationships, because justice is a product of the laws we make. And those laws, those rules, are the boundaries that are going to define how we can and cannot relate to other human beings, right? And for Plato and Socrates, and later Aristotle, who was a student of Plato, the matter of solving the problem of justice, of creating a just society, was perhaps their most urgent task to try to solve. And when you think about every day living in a nation with a government, we just had the State of the Union speech last night with Sleepy Joe. And every day our politics, whether you can recognize it always or not, is dedicated to the question of making for a more just society, right? Ostensibly, that's what all those politicians are dedicated. I'm not sure they all succeed. I'm not sure they're all perfectly dedicated in the way we'd like them to be. Okay, so let's keep going here. So ultimately in the Republic, we get to this question of what is justice? What is justice? Well, let me ask that right now. How might we define what justice is? Does anybody have any thought? I'm just going to throw that out there now and see if I get any answers. What is justice? Nobody. I'm going to make an interesting argument here that in the opening scene here with Socrates and this guy Cephalus, it's pronounced Cephalus. He's the older man who's like the head of the household. He raises the question of what justice is after some of the things that Cephalus has said. Cephalus is an old guy and he's kind of struggling. He's got issues, and he's kind of struggling with things. And we realize he's struggling with his own happiness, and his own happiness is actually tethered to issues of justice, because there's some things that he must have done in his life, as we'll see, that are causing him some problems that make him concerned with justice, by which we mean the rewards that come with doing good and the punishments that come with doing bad. It's not hard to see how those things impact our own happiness. But I would argue that the real question, and this is a really almost a diabolical question, because we think of Socrates and Plato as these righteous moral thinkers. The real question that gets raised in this dialogue is, why do justice at all? And this becomes particularly clear when we look at the story of Gyges, which we'll turn to soon enough, in which this character who starts out as a shepherd, his name is Gyges, Gyges, he is given a power to basically perform any injustice and get away with it, right? So imagine, we already have imagined this, we'll kind of come back, circle back, as they say. Imagine a circumstance in which you have the power to commit injustice and get away with it. The question becomes, why wouldn't you do injustice? Why would you ever do justice if you could get away with injustice? And this is one of the great conundrums of this situation. Well, this question was also asked by the primary framer of the Constitution, James Madison, right? James Madison is generally given credit for being the author of the Constitution. The Constitution is the document that defines the powers and the structure of our government, with like the three branches and everything. The three branches that all got together in the, the House chamber last night for the State of the Union speech. And he says, he says human beings, he says men are not angels, by which he means they're not perfect and sometimes they do naughty things. And therefore, because they're not angels, you need government. And what is government? We talked about it last week. Government is this incredible amassing of a monopoly of power to punish people. The government is the only one that can punish people through the legal system with courts and police officers and prisons and, say, capital punishment, right? We can't do that to other people when they do something naughty to us, right? So here's the problem. If you want to have society, since human beings cannot rule themselves, they can't govern themselves, they need government to help govern themselves. And the famous question is, how are you going to control the government once you've given it all this power, right? So it's easy to see how the little people are controlled by government and its laws. But how is the government itself going to be controlled when it's just been given all this power to rule over the citizens of a country, right? Does anyone know what Madison's answer to that question was? How you deal with the power of, so what are we saying? Government is just like Gyges with his ring, right? It has the power to commit injustice and potentially get away with it. Why? Because you have to give government lots of power for it to be able to rule over people and regulate their conduct, right? What is anybody, Gyges starts out as a shepherd. He finds this ring like in the ground in a sculpture. It's like a bronze sculpture. What does he become after being a shepherd?
He becomes an invisible man.
Yeah. But he uses that as like a tool. He becomes invisible, and then what position does he take on by the end of the story?
The king.
Yeah, he ain't no shepherd anymore. He's a king, right? And why is he a king? Because he's now representative, the kind of ultimate representative of political power, right? The same guy who is the biggest criminal, aka Gyges, is now the most powerful person in the land, also known as a king, right? This is going to become really relevant when we look at actually George Orwell's 1984 later on. Like where does the biggest threat lie in terms of human beings' naughty behavior? Is it that poor bum on the street who steals a loaf of bread? Or is it that bum who's in elected office who has the powers of government at their disposal? Does that question make sense? Okay. I want to pick up with, let me find the title, right? The Greek word of the title of this book is politeia. And politeia literally means like constitution or regime or way of life or form of government. So it's quite natural here that we have a discussion of justice occurring in a book that's titled, or its title has to do with government and politics itself. Because as I've mentioned, it's been understood from ancient times to modern times that one of the primary functions of government is to make laws by which people live, right? And different forms of government make different types of laws that benefit different people in different ways, right? Okay. Yeah, let's skip over that for now. So what is justice? I want to turn to the text in just a minute because I don't want to lecture too much longer. But there is a big, Socrates in his conversation with Cephalus, he raises the specter of this question, what is justice? But it turns out that they all have a kind of working understanding of what this thing is. It's not like they have no basic conception of it that they're working with when they speak. And if you want to understand what justice is in its broadest sense, it is simply a system for the distribution and administration of rewards and punishments throughout society, right? Based on some notion of right and wrong. So you do the right thing and society rewards you. And one of the most common rewards of justice is simply the fact that you don't get punished, right? Simply the fact that your freedom is maintained and you're left alone to do as you please, right? And of course, if you do what's wrong. Most of the time you get punished, and you're very likely to get punished. And so the whole story with Gyges raises the specter of being able to do the wrong thing and get away with it. Right? Why do we have justice? We've kind of already established it, because we need it for the order of society and the security and well-being of each individual in it. So therefore, justice is an expression of the common interest of any community, right? It's supposed to manifest the laws are there precisely to benefit not just you, not just your neighbor, but the whole society. Therefore, the interest is common, right? Okay. Why do we care about justice? Isn't justice something abstract? Isn't it something that's a kind of far off, distant thing? Well, one of the wonderful things that Plato does in the opening pages of this dialogue is to establish just why justice is so relevant to our immediate existence, our own well-being, our desires, our aspirations, our hopes, and so on. Anyway, so early on, this character Cephalus talks about what it takes to live well, and he raises the idea of living well, which is really for Plato, it's just a synonym for happiness, right? What is Cephalus really concerned with? He's concerned with the same darn thing we're all concerned with: our own darn self-interest and our own darn happiness. What could matter more to any individual than our own well-being, right? The thing is, our happiness is permanently connected with justice, precisely because justice establishes a system of right or wrong, right? And of course, our pursuit of happiness dictates that, well, do we want rewards or do we want punishments? We want rewards. So our own pursuit of happiness encourages us to seek rewards and avoid punishments, right? So you can see how the two fit hand in hand together. Let me just say two more things. There's two interesting problems, however, with justice as it emerges in the dialogue. And the conflict is one between not just the individual and justice, but really it's a conflict between the interest of the individual and the interest of the collective at large, right? So the first problem is that there's a conflict between our own self-interest and the interests of the community. What does justice demand? It demands that we're not permitted to do everything that we'd like to do. And there's a really funny definition that emerges between the characters in the dialogue over what justice and injustice are, right? And they actually have a definition of justice. And they say that justice is benefiting others and harming ourselves, right? Who would actually put it this way? We all want to show respect to the rules. We don't want to show anybody that we're in disagreement with them. So who would ever acknowledge that justice means benefiting others and harming ourselves? And their definition of injustice is harming others and doing benefit to ourselves. Let's clarify this. Why is justice described as benefiting others and harming ourselves? Or why is doing justice described that way? How is justice a benefit to others? How is acting justly a benefit to others? How is acting justly toward others beneficial to them?
I think-
Because they get away with whatever they want to do.
Oh, no, 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 no. I'm not talking, we're talking about someone acting justly, acting the proper way.
Oh, okay.
Let's put it this way. When I act justly toward you, why is that a benefit for you? It's not complicated
I mean, it will make me happy,
because I'm doing what kind of thing toward you?
the right thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really clear here. You can see very clearly why being just benefits other people. Because forget about our particular definition of what we consider right and wrong here. Let's just keep that off the table entirely, because they don't really raise the specter of specific definitions of what right and wrong are. It's obvious that every time you do the right thing, by definition, that's going to be beneficial to the other person, because doing the right thing by definition means not harming them at the very least, if not benefiting them in some overt way, right? If justice says don't kill and you act justly, well, you don't kill other people, and that benefits them, right?
Mhm.
Why does doing justice harm the doer of justice? That's interesting. We might not think of it in those terms. We might not even agree with that. Why do they claim that doing justice actually harms ourselves? It benefits others, but it harms us.
Because we might see it as a punishment.
Maybe. Why would justice seem like, so we're not talking about someone getting punished here, right? We're talking about someone who follows the rules, and the characters in the dialogue have the audacity to claim that following the rules of justice is actually harmful to the person who follows them. How could that be? We might not agree with them, but how could that be in theory? What does justice prohibit us from doing?
The wrong thing.
It all, and something else that's connected with that. What else does it? Yes, it obviously prohibits us from doing the wrong thing, but what other kind of thing does it prohibit us from doing? The thing that what?
That we have fear.
The fear might be a motivator to do the right thing. No, nobody sees it yet. We got to figure this out. This is really important. Why might justice involve be benefiting others, but actually harming ourselves? It prohibits not just doing, well, it's connected. It doesn't just prohibit us from doing the wrong thing, and it prohibits us from doing what?
Whatever we want.
Yes. Do we not to some degree want to do whatever we darn well please? And wouldn't that make us happy if we could do what we wanted to do?
Maybe.
Maybe. Good answer. Good answer. Because this is the interesting catch here. We'll see in a moment. So Yalen's got it. It prevents us from doing whatever we darn well please we want to do, right? And these characters argue that that's harming ourselves, because they seem to have it. They seem to have a definition of happiness as doing whatever I want. And in theory, if we just think of happiness as pleasure, well, there's a prohibition against murder, rape, and pillage. Well, you know what? It would make me feel good to murder, rape, and pillage. And I can't do it. I feel really oppressed. I feel repressed. I can't act out my desires and my fantasies. I'm not happy because of it, right? So when we talk about justice harming ourselves, we have to start imagining that there are some deep, deep, dark desires in the human psyche, in human nature, that human beings might actually take pleasure in, that are nonetheless, we would also consider them profoundly wrong. I think this is one of the great kind of disturbing psychological insights that's lurking underneath this text, that these characters actually assert that they would actually feel happy from doing things that maybe are even kind of diabolical. Can we imagine that there are human beings that are like that? Can we imagine, for example, that there's human beings who might take pleasure in murder?
Yes, there are people like that.
How do you know that?
On textbook.
What's that?
Textbook and
No,
forensic.
no books, no books. You don't get this kind of answer from a book. Not really. How do we know there are people who like to murder or take pleasure in it? There's this very simple answer.
When one person kill multiple people over and over again.
Yeah, let's be really obvious. People murder people every day, right? They must have taken some type of pleasure in having done it. Now, there's different types of pleasure one might take, but there might be, remember, murder is the wrongful killing of another human being. Manslaughter, where you're defending yourself, is a totally different thing, right? Okay. So if that's what justice is, we see that injustice is the opposite. Injustice is harming others and benefiting ourselves. So do you want to know what the real question of the Republic is? The real question is not what is justice. The real question that the characters at the end of book 1 ask Socrates is why we should do justice at all when it seems to be the case that injustice benefits us and justice benefits only other people, and we care about whom? Everybody. We care about whom? Who do we care about? Let's be honest now. Who do we care about? Most.
Ourselves.
Yeah, numero uno. Numero uno. Now, that doesn't mean that caring about ourselves doesn't involve caring about other people close to us. But, I see everybody getting worked up by the war in Ukraine, which is obviously horrific. But the reality is this type of violence goes on every day in the world, and nobody pays attention to it and nobody cares. And why is that? Because it's on the other side of the world and people have to deal with what's right in front of them and the reality of what's in front of them. That's the one they primarily care about.
Yeah.
Okay. So these characters sitting with Socrates, they seem to have a definition of, so this comes back to a point somebody started making earlier, maybe it was Kenya, I'm not sure. They seem to be defining happiness as doing whatever I damn well please. If I want to kill, I want to be able to kill. If I want to do drugs, I should be able to do drugs. If I want to harm other people because it makes me feel good, I should be able to do that. Do we think happiness is doing whatever you want? And the logic's very simple. What makes someone feel good? I have an impulse. The impulse is satisfied. What happens when we have an impulse and it's thwarted or not satisfied? We don't like it. What does justice do? It meets our impulse with a barrier and says, sorry, you can't do that. Do we think happiness, real happiness, has to do with doing whatever you want? Do you think the person, let me put it this way. Do you think the person that did whatever they wanted to do, and you have to imagine, when I say they did whatever they wanted, you have to imagine any desire you could conceive of, not just the nice ones, right? That's the point here. Imagine if you could get away with stuff like Gyges. Think of the things you might desire to do that when you were a good little boy or girl living under the rules, you never even conceived of. You see the difference there?
Yeah.
Imagine you became the powerful person and all of a sudden you could do all kinds of things that you never would have considered doing when you were just a little person, a little sheeple living in society with all the other equal people. Now you're super powerful. Let's put it this way. Is doing whatever you want going to make a human being happy?
No,
Kenya says no.
no.
What about other? Yalen says no.
Charity said no.
Ashley
No.
says no. Bubakar says no. All right, all right. Now you're scared. You're sounding very moralistic. Why not? One of the questions, why do justice, is partly the question of you have to demonstrate to me why it is the case that I shouldn't want to do whatever I want. And that I should only do certain kinds of things. I should only really want to do the right things, whatever they are. Think about this character Thrasymachus. He says justice is the advantage of the stronger. And he describes the stronger as the people who rule, right? And they make laws in their own interest over other people. Think about the problem here.
Mm-hmm.
What if I'm a ruler and I'm really diabolical and my rule is not murder of any human being is wrong? What if my rule is if you try to murder me, that's wrong and that's a violation of our laws. But if I kill you, that's called justice.
Mm.
That's where Plato goes with Thrasymachus's speech later on in book 1. It's basically like chapter 1, but it's called a book. It gets really diabolical. And then you start to have to separate out morality from justice, right? Thrasymachus makes clear that justice is whatever the rulers say it is, right? Whereas we might think of morality as something deeper than just what politicians say is right and wrong. Maybe there's some type of natural justice in light of the fact that we're human beings. So the concept of natural justice would say, it doesn't matter what political system you're part of. Murder is wrong because it's intrinsically wrong to kill a human being without proper cause, right? And then it doesn't matter what the laws say. The laws, if they say it's okay to enslave or to murder, well, those laws, despite the fact that they're called justice in that society, are actually unjust. Think of, for example, Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King engaged in civil disobedience. He broke the law in the name of a higher law, like what he saw was truly just, right? So look at our society in the 1950s. There was Jim Crow. There was all types of explicit legal discrimination against Blacks and African Americans. And that was the law of the land. Thrasymachus would say, Jim Crow, that's just justice. That's what's just because we said so. And Martin Luther King comes along and says, you call it justice and it's what your government and police enforce, but it's not truly just because as a human being, I am equal to you, not just physically, but morally. Declaration of Independence, we talked about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed with certain basic freedoms. And his argument is your laws are not recognizing my natural freedoms that are God-given. They're not given by the government, they're given by God, by the creator. Okay. So everybody says no. Happiness is not doing whatever you want. Can someone give me a good argument as to why you think that's the case? Why shouldn't we want to do whatever we want? Why should we only want to do the quote unquote right thing, however we define that? Let's take obvious examples. Murdering human beings and enslaving them and treating them as slaves is wrong. I don't think I'm going to get any disagreement from anyone there. Why should we only do the right thing as opposed to whatever we want? In a circumstance in which we could do whatever we want, like Gaijis. Any thoughts about that? Everybody said no. I'm looking at the chat. It's like, no, 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 no. We must have a reason.
Yeah, I think it's not to do the right thing all the time, but I think you will get bored at one point.
Bored of what?
Or doing whatever you want. Maybe,
Wow. We'd
I
get
don't know,
bored.
maybe.
You know, I don't disagree with you that that's not a possibility. On the other hand, I suppose people could get bored with doing justice too and want to start doing injustice. Actually, I think that's a very real phenomena. We get bored in our lives and we want to spice it up, so we start pushing the boundaries. Well, let's put it this way. I don't think boredom's going to be a good motivation for people to do the right thing, right? And I don't think we want to trust people's boredom as the motivator that's going to keep them from doing the wrong thing. Has anyone noticed criminals being bored by doing criminal conduct? Does anyone see that in society?
First, criminals do what?
I mean, my impression, and in the real world, the justice system is imperfect. Some people are wrongfully imprisoned and all kinds of awful things like that. But I have to say that my impression is that people who are real criminals, let's put aside the difficult cases. Let's put aside problems of the criminal justice system. People who are real criminals, who have committed real crimes, my impression is that most of them are, if they had the opportunity, they would commit future crimes going forward. And, very often when they get out of jail, the record says that they continue to commit the crimes. And I think the simple reason is they like doing what they're doing. And they're not bored with it. And imagine if you get a taste for like breaking the law and like you realize the consequences are not like the hellfires or life in prison. I mean, it must be kind of thrilling to, I'm not encouraging anybody, but there's obviously a certain thrill in breaking the law just for the sake of breaking the law, and you did it. And everybody else is living like a square. Okay, I'll ask one more time. Everybody said no. Why should happiness be something other than doing what we want? Why should happiness consist of doing the right thing? Everybody was very clear on that opinion. You must have a reason why you stated that opinion, right? Nobody. Okay, good. That's a problem, but that's an interesting problem. We all believe that happiness should be doing the right thing, but nobody's got a good answer as to why. You know what? If I asked you the same thing, what's wrong about killing a human being, or what's wrong about slavery, or even things like what's wrong about discrimination. We all know those things are very wrong, but if we were asked to explain why they were wrong, it wouldn't be so simple in a lot of cases. And you know what I also blame? I blame the educational system for not providing these basic answers, right? Okay. Could I have a volunteer read for us here? Who would like to read for us? Somebody. Ashley, can you read for us?
Sure, I might mess up the names, but bear with me.
And I'll help you out with the names to the, yeah. So it's
Okay.
Socrates,
Socrates. I went down to the
Piraeus,
yesterday with
Glaucon,
Glaucon, son of
Ariston.
Arston, to praise to the goddess, and at the same time, I wanted to observe how they would put on the festival, since they were now holding it for the first time. Now, in my opinion, the procession of the native inhabitants was fine, but the one of the
Oh, Thracians.
Thracians conducted was no less fitting a show. After we had prayed and looked on, we went off toward town.
Okay, so
Oh.
Socrates is with Glaucon. Glaucon is actually the brother of Plato. Socrates was the teacher of Plato, right? And so they went down to this thing called the Piraeus, which is like the port of Athens. And this is all set just outside of Athens, ancient Athens, Greece, right? And they went to see basically a religious festival. And the festival was something kind of like a spectacle. It was kind of like an event to go and see what was going on. I mean, maybe almost in the same way as you might go to like the ball dropping in Times Square, right? A spectacle, something exciting to watch and something novel and interesting, so on and so forth. Okay, you want to keep going, Ashley?
Sure. Catching sight of us from afar as we were pressing homewards,
Polemarchus,
son of
Cephalus or Cephalus.
sorry guys, ordered his slave boys to run after us and order us to wait for him. The boy took hold of my cloak from behind and said, Polemarchus orders you to wait. Where did my thing go? Okay, of course, wait.
And I turned around and asked.
Oh, and I turned around and asked him where his master was. He is coming up behind, he said, just wait. Of course, we'll wait, said Gatton. A moment later,
Lyceratus, son of Nicias, and some others.
Apparently, from the procession,
Polemarchus
and Socrates. I guess you two are hurrying to get away to town. That's not a bad guess, I said. Well, he said, do you see how many of us there are? Of course. Well, then, he said, either prove stronger, these men, or stay here. Isn't there still one other possibility? I said, are persuading you that you must let us go. Could you really pursue? He said.
Could you really persuade, he said?
Persuade, he said.
If we don't listen.
If we don't listen.
Okay. So Polemarchus accosts Socrates first with his slave, and he says, Polemarchus orders you to wait, right? And Polemarchus is like a young guy. I mean, like he's a young adult. His father is an old man, and his father is wealthy, and Polemarchus is the son of a wealthy man, and he acts very much like a snobby, obnoxious, entitled young guy who thinks he can order other people around, even like Socrates, which is kind of stunning because Socrates is, within Athens, very well known, very famous, very respected as being a wise and also a just man, right? So he says, Socrates basically wants to go home after the festival. And Polemarchus says, you ain't going home. He says, well, he said, do you see how many of us there are here? Meaning like Polemarchus and his friends. What is he saying when he says that? What's the implication of what he's saying? Do you see how many of us there are here? And how few of you? What's the implication?
Implication is that they have power over him.
Yes, they have powers in numbers, right? What does this look like? This looks like the what did Hobbes, he talked about a secret machination, and he talked about like combination of people, right? So he's got strength in numbers, right?
Mhm.
What did Thrasymachus say justice was? That's how you pronounce his name, Thrasymachus. He said justice is the advantage of the
Those in authority.
You're
Never-
right, but he used a different expression that's relevant here. Justice is the advantage of the stronger. Yes, and he does make reference to government later on as being the ultimate power, right? Because strength has to do with power. That's good. What does he mean when he says justice is the advantage of the stronger? I think we could use another word for advantage for it to make a little more sense to us in kind of common sense language. What does he mean by advantage? Who does justice benefit for Thrasymachus? It benefits does it benefit the weaker or the stronger?
The stronger.
Yeah. Why doesn't it benefit the weaker?
Because they have no power.
Yeah, because it's the strong people who have the ability to impose their justice on others.
Mhm.
And when they do that, why the heck would they make it in the interest of the other person, harm themselves and benefit the weaker person? That's irrational to them, right? So look at this situation here, this little tiny situation where these guys say, you really want to go back to the city? Do you see how many of us there are here compared to you? What's he saying? We are stronger and therefore can tell you what to do because, well, in theory, I mean, he's making a threat, right? A physical threat. Now, does he mean it totally seriously? It's hard to tell. Could be like kind of jokey, but normally my experience in life is when people joke in this way, I don't laugh too much. I'd have like a chill run up my spine because I wouldn't think it's very funny making a joke through a threat. So for Polemarchus, justice seems to be the advantage of the stronger. And what's the common expression we have for justice is the advantage of the stronger? We have another expression that's very close to it.
The majority.
Well, that's very interesting because the majority is in democracy, the majority is the source of power of government, right?
Mhm.
When we say in a democracy, justice is the advantage of the stronger, we define the stronger as, the majority of the people. That's not how all government in Russia, for example, it's the oligarchs. And oligarch is actually a Greek word for someone who's wealthy. And it's normally just a small minority who are wealthy, right? At least extremely wealthy, the 1% and stuff like that. So in oligarchy, justice is the advantage of the stronger, but the stronger is defined by the people with the most wealth. So it's the advantage of the wealthy, because in that case, wealth translates into power. In democracy, having a majority is the thing that translates into political power. What do we say? Blank makes blank. Justice is the advantage of the stronger. We say might makes right. Might makes right. And that's essentially the argument that Thrasymachus is making with slightly different language. So power is what makes justice justice. Do we agree with that? Look at this situation. We have the power, therefore we can dictate to you what you can do and not do because you're outnumbered. Okay. Ashley, you want to keep going?
Does anybody else want to volunteer?
Okay, yes. Yalen, can you read for us?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're right here. Let's just pick up from right here.
Okay, isn't there still one other possibility? I say our persuading you
Persuading.
that you must let us go. Could you really persuade? He said, if we don't listen, there's no way. Say, how you pronounce that?
Glaucon.
Falcon. Well then, think over, bearing in mind we won't listen. Then
Adamantus.
Adamantus said, it is possible you don't know that at sunset there will be a torch raised on horseback for the goddess. On horseback, I said, that is noble. Will they hold torches and pass them to one another while racing the horses? Or what do you mean? That is, said Polemarch. That's how you
Polemarchus.
said?
Yep.
Polemarch.
Polemarchus.
And besides, they all go all night festival that will be worth seeing well kept.
We'll get up after dinner and go see it. Okay, so Socrates is compelled to stay and he comes up with an excuse of why he's going to stay. So Socrates gets dragged back to the house of Polemarchus's father, and the father is named Cephalus, and his situation really enters us into the full discussion of the issues in dealing with justice. I would like another volunteer to read for us, please. Daniel, can you read for us?
Yeah, no problem.
So
Where?
let's pick up right here.
Okay.
Right there.
Syphilis.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
There we go. Right there.
Okay. Syphilis. Polemarchus.
Polemarchus's father.
Okay. Father was also at home, and he seemed very old to me, for I had not seen him for some time. He was seated on a sort of cushioned stool and was crowned with a wreath, for he had just performed a sacrifice in the courtyard.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's finish the paragraph. Keep going.
Okay. We sat down beside him, for some stools were arranged in a circle there. As soon as Syphilis saw me,
Well, let's just make sure. You can call him Cephalus or Cephalus, but you don't want to call him syphilis because that's that you get when you sleep with the wrong.
As soon as Cephalus saw me, he greeted me warmly and said,
okay, so let's pause right there. So Cephalus, Socrates is not a spring chicken. He's like a slightly later middle-aged man and at the stage of this story. But Cephalus is really an old man. And that's important because he's not like at death's door. He's not like going to die tomorrow, but he's because he's old, he's increasingly aware of his mortality. and he's starting to become concerns about some things that he's done, some concerns about his life, right? That's one thing. The other thing is Cephalus is a wealthy man. This is actually, all these characters are historical figures. We're not reading a history book here. This is not perfect history, but all these characters are drawn from actual historical fact. And we know that Cephalus actually ran like an arms factory. I mean, he wasn't making nuclear weapons in the 5th century BC, but he was making things maybe like swords and spears and shields and helmets and things like that. The kind of thing you would use fighting wars in those days, made of bronze and stuff like that. Anyway, he's a wealthy man, right? And so when Socrates comes into his house, and this guy's like the head of the household, and the other element about him being old is that, you know, old people are wise, right? Because they have lots of experience, and wisdom is like a product of lots of experience. And younger people are stupid in part because they just don't have that much experience. And older people, if they are wise, because not all of them are, it's because they've had a lot of experience. They've been around the block. But the one thing we notice, and this is already, the theme of justice is already here, whether you realize it or not. He's just come in from performing sacrifices in the courtyard, which is like, you know, it's part of the house, you know, like an exterior enclosed area. What's this thing about making sacrifices? What are we talking about here? These are not Christians, remember, these are pagan Greeks. They believe in like Zeus and Athena and Apollo, gods like that, rather than Jesus. There is no Jesus in the 5th century BC. He doesn't exist yet. What is he doing making sacrifices in the courtyard of his house? What is that all about?
Maintaining a good relationship between him and his God.
Yes, absolutely. So by sacrifice, we literally mean like the killing of animals, right? Jesus is understood as the last sacrifice. He dies for our sins, we get redeemed, and then no more sacrifices, no more killing of humans or animals. In the ancient world, there is the killing of humans, there's the killing of animals, and of course, the altar of a church, that marble slab, like in a Catholic church, right? The altar is literally the table on which you sacrifice animals, right? That's why there's the altar. And of course, in Christianity, you don't kill Jesus again, you just have the wafer and you have the wine during communion, if you're Catholic or Episcopal, stuff like that. So he's trying to put him, and why do we make, let's say it again, why do we make sacrifices to the gods? Because we want what? We want to be in their good graces, right? We want, let's put it this way in terms of justice. We want rewards rather than punishments from the gods. Rewards are pleasant, they further our happiness, and punishments, they don't feel good, and we don't want them because we don't think them as furthering our happiness. What might be, so here we're not talking about human justice. We're talking about the divine justice of the gods. It's interesting. Why might he be so concerned about being in good favor with gods, with the gods, the Greek gods? What might be some of the implications of the fact that he's out there making sacrifices to the gods? First of all, let's say he's not in God's good favor. What are the potential consequences? What could the gods do to him?
Punish.
Yeah, punish. How? What's the classic punishment that either God with a capital G or gods plural give to people when they're naughty?
In this
They
case,
put
might
them,
be
they
death.
tell them.
Even worse than death. Oh, we know there's something much worse than death. Much worse than death. Much worse than sickness. Much worse than sorrows.
Of being put into hell.
Yeah, the ultimate jail. Someone said jail. The ultimate jail. Hell. How long do you get thrown in the jail called hell?
Forever.
When do you get parole from hell?
Never.
Yeah, you're there for your soul is there for an eternity. Many religions and many of the Greeks, probably not all of them, they believed in the immortality of the soul, right? So the body is just a superficial husk. It's going to be cast off at some point, and you're going to live on in the afterlife forever. And you want to go to, so the Greeks had their version of heaven and hell. They have slightly different names. Hades, it's called, which we use sometimes for hell too. You want to stay in good relations with the gods because you don't want to go to hell in the afterlife because you'll be there forever and it's hot. Let's just say. Also, think about hell. In this world, you might have done something really naughty, but the police didn't see it. Is it the case that sometimes the human justice system misses crimes and doesn't punish them?
Yes.
Yeah, all the time it probably happens. Every day. Do the gods miss any behavior? Yeah, so one of the characteristic of all gods that I'm aware of is that they're basically all-seeing and none of your conduct escapes their view. And why is that? Because maybe the police, the popo, missed you stealing something from the store, but God didn't. And if you didn't get punished in this world with your body, you're going to get punished in the next one with your soul. Okay, good. In that one little sentence alone, all this stuff is lurking. Okay. Even of this thing about like, you need the punishment of the gods because the police miss stuff. Let me ask this. Is Cephalus a good man or a bad man? Is he a just man or an unjust man?
He's a good man and a just man.
Why is he a good man? So you don't learn too much about him, okay? But I think there's a little tell here. Why would you call him a just man?
Because he's doing what is right.
That's great. Since Cephalus is making sacrifices and he's exhibiting religious piety, he's not only following the rules of his religion, he's going out of his way to make these sacrifices. He's a just man. Does anyone want to make an argument that he's making sacrifices precisely because he's been an unjust man? When you're just, do you need to go to confession? I mean, I suppose as a Catholic, like you're supposed to go to confession every so often regardless of what you've done. Well, you're a sinner, so you've done something. But if you've done nothing, do you need to go to confession?
No.
Not really. There's nothing to confess, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we can make an argument that the very fact that he's making sacrifices is an indication that, and he'll say this later on, he'll say it later on more explicitly. It's an indication that maybe at some point earlier in his life that he did something that was maybe not so good, AKA unjust. And now he's trying to make up for it because he's an old man getting closer, and the long road of life is getting shorter and shorter for him because he's at the end of it. And he's going to get to death's door and he doesn't want to go to hell. He wants to go to heaven. Okay. Daniel, you want to keep going? You there, Daniel?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good.
Yep, no problem.
Let's pick up-
Socrates. Yep. Okay. Socrates, you don't. Oh, sorry. You don't come down to us in the
Piraeus.
Piraeus very often, yet you ought to. Now, if I still had the strength to make the trip to town easily, there would be no need for you to come here. Rather, we would come to you. As it is, however, you must come here more frequently. I want you to know that as the other pleasures, those connected with the body, whether away in me, the desires and pleasures that have to do with speeches grow the more. Now do as I say, be with these young men, but come here regularly to us as to friend and your very own kin.
Good. Okay, so Mika, he says Mika, like he acts as if Socrates came here under his own volition, right? He was forced to come. So there's a little irony there. And then he says, after being forced by his son to come into the house, he says, is like basically Mikasa Sukasa, treat us as if we're kin, as if we're family, right? That's an interesting remark, but we don't have time to think about it more. But he starts to talk about the pleasures of life, starting with the pleasures of the body, and then he talks about the pleasures of speeches. So we might consider the pleasures of body versus the pleasures of mind. And of course, human happiness consists of some mixture of pleasures of the body and pleasures of the mind, or we might say pleasures of the soul, or pleasures that are not simply physical pleasures, right? And of course, justice is connected with this issue of pleasure and desire that he references, because justice dictates the desires that were permitted to satisfy and the desires were not permitted to satisfy. Okay. You want to keep going, Daniel?
Okay, I'll do. For my part, Kiphilis, I am really delighted to discuss with the very old. I said, since they are like men who have proceeded on a certain road that perhaps we too will have to take. One ought, in my opinion, to learn from them that sort of road it is, whether it is rough and hard or easy and smooth. From you in particular, I should like to learn how it looks to you. For you are now at just the time of life the poets call the threshold of old age. It is a hard time of life, or what have you to report of it?
All right, so he talks about what sort of road it is. What is the road he's referring to here, Socrates? The road of what? It's a metaphor, right? It's not literally a road. What are we talking about?
Like journey of life.
Yeah, exactly. Well put. Very good. The road is the journey of life. He says, Cephalus, I can see you're kind of getting toward the end of it, but he doesn't mean that in a negative way. He says, since you are there, you can tell us younger people. I mean, not that Socrates is young, but he's younger than Cephalus. He said, tell us what your journey looks like from your point of view, because we're not there yet. We can't see what it looks like. Give us an account, give us a report of it. And particularly it's a question is it a pleasant place to be, or is it not a pleasant place to be? It's an interesting question. And superficially, Cephalus is a wealthy man. So we might think quite naturally it's fairly pleasant because he's got money, he's got resources to take care of his worldly well-being. All right. Daniel, you think you can keep going a little bit longer?
If maybe someone else wants to go.
Okay. Who can I pick on now? Destiny, can you read for us? Is it Rukaya? Could you read for us?
Yes, Professor, I can do it.
That's awesome.
Okay. So just to make sure, from which point I have to start?
By Zeus,
Okay.
right here.
By Zeus.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I did it again.
Mhm.
There we go.
By Zeus, I shall tell you just how it looks to me. Socrates, he said, some of us who are about the same age often meet together and keep up the old proverb. Now then, when they meet, most of the members of our group lament, longing for the pleasures of youth and reminiscing about sex, about drinking, bouts, and feasts, and all that goes with things of that sort. They take it hard as though they were deprived of something very important and had then lived well, but are now not even alive.
Okay. So he's got a bunch of old geezer buddies he's been friends with for a long time. And when they get together to hang out, they all lament. They're all upset as old men. How does it look to most of the men in Cephalus's crowd, in his crew, right? Most of them, he says it sucks because they're old, their bodies are decaying, and what they seem to care about most in terms of their own happiness are the pleasures of the body, right? They talk of the sex, drinking, eating, things of that sort that's said, right? What's the problem? At old age, sex isn't what it used to be. They can't drink like they used to, and they can't eat like they used to. So they can't, in terms of these things, they can't enjoy themselves in the way they used to. And for them, they can't be happy because of it. So for them, old age does not seem so pleasant. Now we'll see, those are the things that Cephalus's buddies, old age buddies, care about. Let's see what Cephalus cares about and whether that makes him happy or not. You want to keep going?
Some also bewail the abuse that old age receives from the relatives. And in this key, they sign a refrain about all the evils old age has caused them. But Socrates, in my opinion, these men do not put their fingers on the cause. For if this were the cause, I too would have suffered the same things insofar as they depend on old age, and so would everyone else who has come to this point in life. But as it is, I have encountered others for whom it was not so, especially
Sophocles, famous Greek
Sophocles.
tragedian.
Okay. I was once present when the poet was asked by someone, Sophocles, how are you in sex? Can you still have intercourse with a woman? Silence, man, he said. Most joyfully did I escape it, as though I had run away from a sort of frenzy and saved his master. I thought at the time that he had spoken well, and I still do. For in every way, old age brings great peace and freedom from such things.
Okay, so he says, for him and also for Sophocles, like actually all these pleasures of the body are a certain kind of burden that he's now he doesn't have to waste his time pursuing them anymore, like a young virile man. And old age has brought him a certain kind of peace. And in part, also, the peace comes from the wealth he has, as we'll see. You going to keep going?
Yeah. When the desires cease to strain and finally relax, then what Sophocles says comes to pass in every way. It is possible to be rid of many madmasters, but of these things and of those that concern relatives, there is one just cause, not old age, Socrates, but the character of the human beings. If they are orderly and content with themselves, even old age is only moderately troublesome. If they are not, Then both age, Socrates and youth alike turn out to be hard for the church.
Okay, so Cephalus makes a really, really big claim. He says that what really matters in not just his life, I think he's making a broader claim. What matters for human beings is not these bodily pleasures like sex, drugs, rock and roll. Not that they're, they're obviously enjoyable, but he's establishing an order of priority or a hierarchy. He's saying, yeah, they're nice, but it's actually quite nice to be liberated from all those burdens, all these tempestuous desires that bother young people. He says what really matters is the character of the human, or he says character of the human beings, the character. What is he talking about when he talks about the character of a human being? What are we talking about here? What is the character of a human being? What does that have to do with? What is it about? It's a little more than what describes you. When you say what describes you as a person, I would think more of like personality. And there's a difference between your personality and your character. Your personality is kind of like all the idiosyncratic psychological things that make you you. But your character has to do with your moral identity. Yes. So it's your moral character, right? What kind of human being are you in terms of the issue of righteous and not righteous, just and unjust, right? He says what matters most in terms of your happiness is not physical pleasures, but what kind of human being you are morally. Do you agree? Do we agree? Yes or no?
Yes.
And what's his argument here? It's very simple, that a righteous person is going to be the happiest person, right? This is the argument Socrates is going to try to make in the face of Gyges getting to do whatever he wants and getting away with it. He's got to make an argument that what really makes you happy is being just, right? I mean, we've talked about this already, actually. Okay, can you keep going? It's Rukeya?
Yeah, Rukaya.
Rukaya.
Yeah.
I didn't pronounce it.
Then I was full of wonder at what he said and wanting him to say still more. I stirred him up, saying, Cephalus, when you said these things, I suppose that the many do not accept them from you, but believe rather that it is not due to character that you bear old age so easily, but due to possessing great substance. They say that for the rich there are many consolations.
So this is hilarious. When Cephalus claims that what matters is your moral character to your happiness, he kind of seems to be asserting that, well, he's a righteous man, because that's what his opinion is, that happiness is connected with being moral. And Socrates plays devil's advocate and says, Cephalus, people are going to look at you and they're not going to say you're happy because you're moral. They're going to say you're happy because you're rich. And because you're rich, you live very comfortably. And all the problems that come with old age can be dealt with this, can be handled better with that. And Socrates is getting at something here. I think we're going to discover that while Cephalus talks a good game, I mean, my goodness, he's making sacrifices. He looks so pious. Now he's talking about the moral character is what matters most in life. Socrates doesn't buy it, okay? And we'll see why in a second. You want to keep going?
Okay. What you say is true, he said. They do not accept them, and they do have something there, but not, however, quite as much as they think. Rather, the saying of Themistocles holds good. When a Seriphian abused him, saying that he was illustrious, not thanks to himself, but thanks to the city, he answered that if he himself had been a Seriphian, he would not have made a name, nor would that man have made one had he been an Athenian. And the same argument also holds good for those who are not wealthy and bear old age with difficulty. The decent man would not bear old age with poverty very easily, nor would the one who is not a decent sort ever be content with himself, even if he were wealthy.
Okay, so it cuts both ways. He's acknowledged that if you're wealthy but not just, you're not going to be happy. But if you're just and you don't have money, you're not going to be you're not going to be totally happy either, right? So then I want to kind of cut to the chase and wrap things up here. He talks about how did you get your money? How did you make it? Think about it. For some people, money is happiness, or they think money can buy happiness. And typically it's those people who pursue money singularly. I mean, we all pursue money, but some people pursue it as an end in itself. Those people think that money, in a sense, is happiness. So let me go forward to the, okay, right? Yeah. So we'll see what the relationship is for Cephalus between money and his own happiness, and then we'll call it a night. All right, Ruqayya, if you could just read a little bit more this page and we're done.
Professor, I think we are on the before page.
What's that?
So you flip on page because
I want to skip ahead here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he talks about how he got his money and so on and so forth, and what his relationship with his money is.
Okay.
Right?
No problem. Indeed it is, I said, but tell me something more. What do you suppose is the greatest good that you have enjoyed from possessing great wealth?
Okay, what's the greatest good that you have from professing wealth? His question really is, what is the money really for? What is the money really good for? Is it good because it gives you comfort? Is it good simply because you love money and you equate it with your happiness? What is it? And Cephalus gives his answer here. You want to go?
What I say wouldn't persuade many perhaps. For no oil, Socrates, he said, that when a man comes near to the realization that he will be making an end, fear and care enter him for things to which he gave no thought before.
Okay, listen to this. He says, Socrates, that when a man comes near to the realization that he will be making an end, fear, and care enter him for things to which he gave no thought before. When he says that he's going to be making an end, what does he mean by that? What's the end that he's going to be making?
Like near to the death?
Yes, the end of the road, the end of the
Yeah.
line, right?
Yeah.
To go back to the metaphor of the journey of life or the road, right? He's at the end of the line. Fear, and we might say concern, enter him over things which he never thought about before. Cephalus is talking about himself, remember? He's kind of speaking in the abstract, but in the third person, but he's talking about himself. Fear of what? Any thoughts?
Fear of death.
Yeah, and also something else about, and actually it's something even more than just the fear of death. It's obviously related, but it's something more. The fear of what?
Fear of getting punished by God.
Yes, the fear of getting punished by God. And of course, that's a consequence of death, because then you meet your maker and so on and so forth. And notice he says he didn't give these things any thought before. What does before mean?
like young age, younghood.
Earlier on.
Yeah, exactly. When he was a young man, when he was a early adult, middle age, he's not thinking about it till now. And the only reason he's thinking about it now is because he's now at death's door and he's afraid of going to hell.
Hmm.
Does that sound like a moral man? A man of good character?
You sound like Flipper, like he flip when he going to old days.
Yeah, he's a fair weather fan. He's only concerned with being pious, and he's only concerned with the gods and being just because he's afraid of the punishments of hell. Has Cephalus done something wrong? Has Cephalus done things that are wrong in his life?
Maybe.
Maybe. If you had done everything right, would you be concerned about going to hell?
Oh.
No.
Let's just say God has a really good justice system.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're good, you go to heaven, and when you're bad, you go to hell. Look,
Right.
it's obvious that he's not been a righteous man. He's been a man of lacking in good character, because now he's afraid of going to hell. And what does it mean? It means that during his life, we don't know what we're never told what it is he's done, but by inference, we know he's done something. And not only that, not only has he done the wrong things in his life that he's now concerned about, we might say he's having pangs of regret and conscience and guilt. But you notice when he was younger, he did not feel pangs of conscience or guilt because he had no problem committing whatever transgressions he committed. And not only that, it's obvious that when he committed those transgressions, he didn't what? He didn't what? We're almost done here.
He did not confess.
He what?
He did not confess.
No conscience?
No, he did not confess.
He didn't what?
Confess.
Oh, no, he certainly didn't confess. Yeah, you're at it. He didn't get caught. And now he's concerned about getting caught by the gods because he's now concerned that those stories that he thought were fables when he was younger might be true, and that the gods see everything, and that if they've seen what he's done, he's going to hell. Right? So look at what he says. So not only has he been naughty, but he's gotten away with it. And when he thought he could get away with it, notice this big thing. He didn't feel guilty about what he was doing. He didn't exhibit conscience. He didn't exhibit shame, remorse, regret, anything like that. And why didn't he exhibit those things? Because he got away with it. You can, and this is the same story as Gyges. Gyges' invisibility is just a metaphor for his power to do things and get away with them. Do human beings feel guilt when they know they can get away with things, or is guilt actually a product of their fear of getting caught? If you listen to a lot of police officers, they will tell you that a lot of criminals, there are always exceptions, but a lot of criminals only act guilty when they know that showing guilt will help them out in getting less punishment. Right? And that's not it's not a criticism of criminals. Everybody would do that. When you go into the court, you would say, oh, I feel terrible for what I've done. And the reason you're saying it is, well, nobody likes to be treated like a criminal because it's a benefit not to be treated like a criminal, and you want less punishment. Duh. Only crazy people go into the court and say, yeah, I did it and I'll do it again. Right? Those are really, there are people like that, of course. So this raises a really disturbing specter that conscience and guilt which some of the things we think are really inborn and like innate are really just a product of circumstances of the justice system being there to keep you honest, right? He's got fear for the first time in his life. During his life, he didn't have fear, but now he's got fear, not just of death, which Hobbes thinks is the worst type of fear, but for him, it's the fear of hell. Of course, the problem with the fear of hell is a lot of people probably don't believe hell is real, so they have nothing to fear at all, right? That's the catch with hell. He says the tales told about what is in Hades. So the tales are the myths, which are the poetic and religious stories about the gods, explaining the way the world is, among other things, explaining the justice of the gods, right? Which is to say, if you sin, which is say, break the rules of the gods, you get sent to hell. The tales told about what is in Hades, that the one who has done unjust deeds here must pay the penalty there. Now, let's be clear. If he's concerned about going to Hades, and Hades is the place for unjust people, we know darn well that he's been unjust at some period in his life.
Yes.
Here's the irony. He spends his time as an old man looking very just. He's making sacrifices. It makes him look good. But what's the irony? He's performing sacrifices precisely because he's done things in the past that are not good, that he doesn't want to go to hell over, right? So this is another element here that connects in with the story of Gyges. So let's just finish with this. Oh, let me just finish reading this and I'll come back to it. You must pay the penalty there. He said, at which he laughed up to then. So when he was a kid and heard these stories about hell, he said, oh, that's silly. That's old wives' tales. But they now make his soul twist and turn. He's speaking in the third person, but he's talking about himself. It sounds like he's having like sleepless nights and stuff like that. Make his soul twist and turn because he fears that they might be true. Whether it be due to the debility of old age or whether he discerns something more of the things in that place, meaning Hades, because he is already nearer to them, as it were. He is at any rate now full of suspicion and terror. Now here is Hobbes' fear. And it's not well, remember what the Leviathan was. It was the mortal god. Here we have the fear of the divine gods, the immortal gods by definition. And he's got fear and terror. And the problem is the fear and terror of the gods is working now as an old man, but the fear and terror of the gods obviously didn't prevent him from doing naughty things when he was young. And he reckons up his accounts, which is to say he reckons up all his transgressions, his wrongs, and considers whether he has done anything unjust to anyone. Now the man finds many unjust deeds. Now the man finds many unjust deeds in his life. He's talking about himself. Often even wakes from his sleep in a fright as children do and lives in anticipation of evil. I mean, you kind of all know this story, like the person who goes through their life, like they stop believing in God or whatever. And then on their deathbed, they like find Jesus, they find God because they're terrified about going to hell. To the man who is conscious of himself of no unjust deeds, sweet and good hope is ever beside him, a nurse in his old age. So he's right. For the man of good character or the woman of good character who is just, they sleep easy because they know they've done the right thing and have nothing to worry about. But the person who's done the unjust deed has to fear going to hell. Okay. So the irony about Cephalus is that he appears to be very just, in part because he's making sacrifices. Where does he get those animals to sacrifice? Where does he get them from? How does he get them? It's a simple answer.
Buy them.
He buys them with his
money.
With his money. So what is he essentially doing when he's making sacrifices? He's trying to buy his way out of hell. Of course, a rich man would try to do that, right?
Yes.
And then when you start thinking about his own transgressions, you wonder if it isn't the case that some of his transgressions involve making money in ways that are unjust, right? So it all comes kind of full circle. But one of the catches here is that a man that superficially looks very just because he's a dignified old man, he's respected in society, he has, important friends, he's been a businessman and a public figure, he's making sacrifices that looks very pious. It turns out behind all those appearances, there's a man who's actually kind of corrupt and he's a hypocrite, right?
Deceptive.
So think about this story of Gyges, and we'll just call it night right here. Gyges gets this ring, right? He gets a ring that when he turns it a certain way, he makes himself invisible. And the invisibility, what does he do when he's invisible?
He commits adultery.
Yeah, so those are the specific
Right.
things. But he does all the injustice when he's invisible, right? And we could talk about, like, it's really interesting. The first thing he does when he gets invisible is he basically rapes a woman, and then he makes a coup and becomes the king himself. Very interesting desires to have when he finally gets his desires to be fulfilled. Kind of the ultimate in power and control. So when he's invisible, he acts really, really bad. And the invisibility here is just a kind of a metaphor for the power to do the wrong thing and get away with it with nobody seeing. But how does he act when he turns the ring back and he's visible? Does he still act unjust?
No,
No, what does he do?
he do things.
How does he act?
Just.
And not just a little bit just. He acts as justly as he possibly can. And what kind of reputation does he have in his society? Does he have a reputation as a very just man or a very unjust man?
A just man.
Oh, why does he want to do good things when he's visible? Because he will get a reputation for being the best man in his community.
Yes.
And by being the best man in terms of the opinion people have of him, what is that actually going to allow him to do?
To do things right.
Pardon?
To do things right.
I would actually make the opposite argument.
Oh.
That by having such a good reputation, it actually is part of, you could say, the cloak of invisibility that's going to conceal all his dirty, naughty deeds. So what if someone, a conspiracy theorist, came out and said, you know what? I think I almost saw Gyges doing something naughty. The whole society is going to say, you are a crazy conspiracy theorist because we know Gyges and we know he's the greatest guy on the block. He was bathing the feet of people in poverty like the Pope, and he was handing out gifts to the poor and giving them housing. How dare you say anything negative about Gyges, because he's the most just man we know in our society. Right? Do we have any parallels to this today in our own society?
Yes.
Like people who are presented as the most righteous, the most decent, the most pure, but they might not be?
Yes.
You have any examples? Like, what are you thinking of off the top of your head?
Our world leaders.
Okay, yeah, we don't have to like get into politics of left, right, and Democrat, Republican, but let's just say, I will speak from my impression. Those are the powerful people, not us. We're the little people. You know what? Thrasymachus talks about, he talks about the leaders being shepherds, and the sheep are the people. Us, like we the people, the sheep. And it appears that the shepherd is concerned with tending his flock. Well, he's concerned with tending his flock for a while, but then he fleeces the sheep and then he sends them to the slaughter. That's the only reason the shepherd's caring for the sheep. He's ruling the sheep, not for the sheep's sake, but for his own sake. But of course, we know that the rulers, when they come out, they say everything they do is, well, there's an expression, for the people. That's actually the Democrat mantra for the last few years. They have a whole agenda. It's called for the people, because it would never be for them. Not that the Republicans are any better. Most of them, they're pretty crappy. But I mean, if anybody has the power to conceal their unjust deeds behind a veneer of justice and decency, it would be the powerful people. Because by definition, they have the power, they have the resources, they have the money. And let's add, in our world, they have the media to paint an image of them and conceal all their naughty business. I need only mention the name of Jeffrey Epstein, a man who is connected in with Hollywood and with Washington, D.C., and with all types of corporate leaders around and political leaders around the world. And a man who was totally concealed from public view until very recently. And even when he was caught about little more than 10 years ago, he had friends in high places who got him off. Right. And I mean, the facts on that man who didn't kill himself were not permitted to come out. And let me tell you, when he first got out of jail, like 10 years ago, he got like a year in jail, but it was a total joke. He had a party. He was a convicted sex offender and convicted with underage girls. And he went to a party with people who were luminaries in politics and media, and they knew who he was and what he has done after his conviction. And they didn't care. They didn't care. And about 4 years ago, there was an ABC News reporter who had put together like a whole expose on him, exposing his connections and what he was up to. Because it was supposed to, it was a conspiracy theory, like everything else is always a conspiracy theory. And she had done all this hardcore investigative journalism. And her bosses at CBS, or maybe it was ABC, they said, sorry, we can't run your story. Sorry. Just never forget that the function of the media is to speak truth to power. Remember that? Their goal is to expose the lies of the powerful, so that we keep them honest and the people have a voice and they get the truth, because we need the truth if we're going to vote for these people and stuff, right? Instead of the media exposing the truth and letting everybody know, the media, the powerful people, the media is actually the powerful with the other powerful, they concealed it. They didn't expose and speak truth to power. They protected the powerful. They protected them. And what did they do by doing that? Maintain their public image as just and righteous, at least in contrast to like the implications of being connected with someone like Jeffrey Epstein, right? Which is like pretty awful. Talk about Hades. Let's hope Jeffrey Epstein and his buddies are in Hades right now, and the ones that are still alive will make it there shortly. That will be something that will unify this country beyond all our divisions one day, maybe. Okay, I don't want to rant a little bit. Any thoughts, question, comments before we go here? Okay, let's call it a night. You guys have been awesome for hanging in here for so long. I owe you a short class next week, and I will not fail in that. But this was really important because these things are going to unfold the rest of the semester. Otherwise,
Thank you, Professor.
you guys
Thank
don't
you,
have any questions or
Professor.
concerns or anything. Have a great night.
You too, Professor. Good night.
Thank you,
And
Professor. Good night.
Rukeya, thank you for the lovely job you did reading. Ashley, thank you for the
Thank
lovely
you,
job you
Professor.
did reading.
I like readings.
What's that?
I love to read.
You're hired.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Alt F4, Zoom meeting, mute.